Good morning and good afternoon. This is our first international webinar. I'm Sean from the Malaysian International Chamber of Commerce and Industry, one of the oldest chambers in Malaysia. And it's great to organize and co-collaborate with this international webinar. And we have audience from China, Asia to Europe and the UK. This topic is quite good. It's sharing by China and Malaysia. China and Malaysia is one of the first economies to have overcome the lockdown and on the recovery road. So it's great at the moment to share ahead of the curve in navigating new workplace. It's a sharing of experiences between the two countries on how they navigated the new normal. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce the moderator of the day, Ms. Hilda Liao from PwC. Hilda has more than 16 years of experience in the global mobility services in the UK, Singapore, and Malaysia. I guess you can read about it a bit later. But without any more, I would like to pass over the floor to Hilda. So Hilda, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes, okay, ready? All right, I'll hand the floor to you and have fun.
Thank you, Sean. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hilda Liao, and I lead the Global Mobility Practice in PwC Malaysia. Today, we'll be talking to you about COVID-19, how it's changed the workplace, and we'll be giving you a comparison between Chinese and Malaysian employment law in this current landscape. As the region roadmaps a recovery plan, short-term reactive measures are making way for planning the medium to long-term response. What does returning to the workplace look like, whether that's in an office, a retail shop, or a factory floor? Over the last months, we've learned that more people than we imagined can work remotely. But to make this a norm in the future? Well, organizations have had to react and act fast, and will continue to do so. But as are they doing enough to ensure that they are best placed for the future, adopting fresh ways of working, and yet prepared for the regulatory and legal implications that come with it? For example, how do you execute risk measures and controls that are specific to COVID-19 and build a framework to manage and monitor legal and operational risks and procedures related to returning to the workplace to help support your people's health and safety, business continuity, and near-term new ways of working? This includes setting expectations for even your suppliers, vendors, and others who come in contact with your workers and facilities. Are you managing your compliance requirements and staying ahead of risk and regulatory changes? Is your approach to compliance fit to navigate the course forward in times of uncertainty, or should we say upheaval? For today's session, Leonard Yeo, a partner from Tay & Partners, and Ying Wang, a partner from Bird & Bird Shanghai, will be taking stock of respective government regulations that are required in the workplace. They will be discussing some of the measures to tackle employees returning to work and how to future-proof a post-COVID-19 world. Leonard leads the Employment and Industrial Relations and Dispute Resolution Practice Groups at Tay & Partners, advising blue-chip corporate clients and foreign multinational companies. A frequent speaker at, and chair at international and regional legal conferences. He's also a prominent writer and thought leader in his field. Widely regarded as a leading employment lawyer in Malaysia and regionally, he holds various key roles in guilds, including the Home Affairs and Human Resource Committee of MICCI, and is regularly featured and acknowledged as a leading practitioner within the fraternity. Ying heads the employment practice at Bird & Bird International HR Services Group. Based in Shanghai, her experience extends across all employment issues, including China labor and social insurance, regulatory matters, layoffs, labor disputes, M&A related matters, cross-border employment, and daily corporate labor issues. In September 2004, Ying was appointed part-time arbitrator of the Shanghai Labor Dispute Arbitration Committee. Ying's clients include multinational companies and Fortune 500 companies in various industries. I'll now hand over to Leonard and then Ying to set the scene on the current governing regulations in the respective recovery stages of the pandemic, Malaysia and China. Over to you, Leonard.
Hi, thank you very much, Hilda. Very kind words. I shall begin by looking at the current situation in Malaysia that we are actually facing. And for those who are in Malaysia, probably you'll be familiar. But in the interest of those who are not in Malaysia, those perhaps in the States or Europe or some of the delegates here from China. In Malaysia, the government imposed what we call the Movement Control Order, MCO, on the 18th of March, after it reported a spike of new COVID-19 infections. The stringent phase of the MCO then transitioned into a conditional phase from the 1st of May until the 9th of June, before a recovery MCO kicked in on the 10th of June. Under the RMCO, businesses and education sectors are allowed to reopen in stages, albeit under specific SOPs, to break the chain of infection. Currently, the RMCO had been extended further to 31st of December 2020, till the end of the year. So almost all sectors in Malaysia have been allowed to operate, while certain businesses such as nightclubs and entertainment centers remain shut due to difficulties in maintaining the new normal, because they couldn't foresee nightclubs or even entertainment centers could still practice social or even physical distancing. Okay, what I'll do is that I've actually pasted the government data of the recent new cases of COVID-19 in Malaysia, and if you look at it, it's we are pretty impressive, compared to some other countries, including our neighboring countries. And if you compare ourselves with even the Western countries or the more developed countries, I think we are ahead in terms of recovery from the heights of the COVID-19 pandemic numbers. I've got the data here up until the 31st of August. And on the 1st of September, 2 days ago, there were 14 new cases. And yesterday, on the 2nd of September, there were only 6 cases. It only shows that we are doing pretty well, but we are also cautious. I believe the government is cautious because of what they read about some other countries having the second, third waves, including some European countries of late, or even Australia. So I think while we are doing good, but I think we have to be very cautious as well. That will be the position currently in Malaysia, Hilda.
And thank you, Leonard. Yeah, over to you, Ying.
Thank you, Hilda. Thank you, Landlord. Yeah, here's a greeting from Shanghai. For the current status in China, after previous local infections in Beijing, Dalian, and Xinjiang during the last 2 or 3 months. Luckily now there's no local infection in China since August 16. According to the announcement issued by the Chinese government today, there's only 11 imported cases in the whole China. There's no local cases here now today. So almost all sectors have been allowed to reopen, while there's a certain restriction on limited business, such as cinemas and travel agencies. And for the foreign nationals, previously they are not allowed to enter into China, even they have valid visa or work permit. But starting from 10 August 2020, foreign nationals from listed countries, most of them are European countries, who hold valid residence permits, including work permits, permits for family reunion and personal matters, etc., may apply for a visa for free at any Chinese embassy in these countries. And then they can use this visa to enter in China. After entering China, they will need to comply with the local epidemic prevention regulations, including 14-day quarantine. The main change from this new announcement is that the applicants may be no longer required to show that necessary economic activity or urgent humanitarian needs in order to gain visas to enter to return China. So that's the current status in China.
Thank you, Ying. Right. While there are huge efforts being made to respond to and contain COVID-19, wider economic consequences, particularly on the displacement of people, could undoubtedly leave a long trail of implications for businesses to manage. Now that organizations begin to resume operations under the new rules, what are mandatory government measures you have to comply with at your workplace? Perhaps we'll start with Leonard for Malaysia.
Hi, thank you, Hilda. In Malaysia, employers are required to comply with the recommended SOPs, the standard operating procedures, in maintaining their premises. Okay, non-compliance with the SOP would result in the employers being fined and the premises being closed down. Okay, the SOPs would depend on the sector of activity. Employers must ensure that they operate the workplace in complying with the SOPs relevant to their respective sector and as published by the National Security Council. So take, for example, there are certain sectors, the SOPs will be tighter, especially those in the construction where they have foreign workers. So the SOPs would require, the foreign workers, or in fact, all the workers at site, to go through a COVID-19 test and so on. And those industries where you work in the office, perhaps less stringent, but they are still considered pretty strict, especially from a country or a jurisdiction where we never encountered such pandemic before. So the SOP set out procedures to ensure health and safety measures against the COVID-19 in the workplace. Okay, I'll quote some examples of the SOPs, which could be common and may not be too common in all countries, but I believe it should be held in some international understanding of the standards where we are practicing. We are required to record attendance of visitors, patrons, and employees, temperature screening at entry points to buildings or even offices. It's compulsory to use face masks outside, and there should be adequate disinfectant products like hand sanitizers and so on. There's also a requirement in law to increase the cleaning processes of the building, of the premises, meaning regular cleaning and sanitization are actually required on intervals, during the day in the office. And companies are to take steps to minimize interaction between employees themselves. For example, they are encouraged or in fact, they are supposed to eat separately in different places, not like everyone group around in the pantry or everyone group around in the meeting room or rooms. They should be encouraged to eat in their separate cubicles or even their rooms. And as far as interaction with clients, particularly in the service sector, we are also encouraged to, have our meeting rooms designated, with all the crosses as you see in some photos or, in your respective countries, and to have at least a 1 meter physical distancing. So you can't sit too close to each other. So the crosses will be marked on the chairs or even the tables. And these are some of the mandatory standard operating procedures in Malaysia, and may be familiar to many countries. Perhaps we would hear it from China.
Thanks, Leonard. Yeah, for China, the Chinese government issued guidance on COVID-19 prevention and control for employers' office reopening in this April. And the Chinese government defines low risk, medium risk, and high risk areas, depending on whether there are any local infections. According to this guidance, employers based in low risk areas are recommended to keep track the employees' travel history. If the employees return from areas of high risk or medium risk areas or abroad, more stringent health management measures should be taken. If employees return from low risk areas, those who pass the temperature check should be allowed to work as normal. And also the employers are recommended to check the employee's health status, maintain a safe working environment, including keeping the offices ventilated, providing sanitation kits, cleaning tools, etc. Reduce the group activities, keep social distancing, educate employees about COVID-19 prevention, and instruct them to wear face masks scientifically, ensure the emergency response capacity. But for those employers who base in medium risk and high risk areas, more stringent measures should be adopted in addition to the above requirements, including, for example, maintain a flexible working hour system or methods, setting an isolated area in the workplace, etc. But now, because there's no local infections for about 2 weeks now, so far the medium and the high risk areas is none in China.
Thank you, Ying, and thank you, Leonard, for sharing the mandatory measures. Next, let's move on to address matters of building scenarios around people and policies. I can think of situations around performance and evaluations, but what about more sensitive matters like employees' well-being? Let's start with this question for Leonard and Ying to address. What should employers do if one of their employees are infected with COVID-19? Over to you, Leonard.
Thank you, Hilda. Okay, if an employee in Malaysia has been declared unfit, i.e. tested positive for COVID-19, or receive a quarantine order from a registered medical practitioner, the employee is entitled to paid leave, paid sick leave, as specified under their employment contract, or if it is not stipulated, and if they are under the Employment Act, it will be according to our local Employment Act. And the employer must comply with orders from the respective authority with regards to contact tracing and quarantine orders. For example, the employee perhaps for whatever reasons returned from overseas, and he or she has been diagnosed, or rather has been tested positive for COVID-19. Once the authorities are being informed, chances are that the premises have to be closed and be cleaned. And If it gets more serious, if let's say there's a discovery of, let's say there's a cluster in a particular building, the entire building will also be shut, you know, from public. And in Malaysia, we call it the Enhanced Movement Control Order. The Enhanced Movement Control Order means that nobody can go into that particular area. And while that is the case, the employer is obliged to disinfect and sanitize the workplace and ensure that the workplace is safe before allowing any employees to return to work. So that will be the standard procedures that Malaysia would, you know, imposes on companies.
Hai Ying, would you like to share for China?
Sure, thanks, Hilton and Leonard. For China, if the employee has been suspected as infected with COVID-19 or receive quarantine orders from the government, the employer may not terminate such an employee for non-fault reasons or engage in mass layoff. That means a layoff more than 20 or 10% of total workforce. And also until this employees is no longer under this above circumstances, that means quarantine and infection with COVID-19. In Beijing, this above restriction also applies to employees who are unable to perform duties due to nursing his or her underage children during the COVID-19 school closures. But luckily now, since September 1, most schools in China has been reopened. The employer must comply with orders from the respective authority with regard to the investigation, contact tracing, and the quarantine orders. The government may close the workplace after an infection case is discovered, and the employer should comply with all these instructions from the government. The employer should ensure that the workplace is safe before allowing employees to return to work. This is for China.
Thank you, Ying. Now, it's clear that, you know, new back-to-work policies and guidelines are essential for returning workers. It follows, of course, and we've heard this earlier, that training on such new practices need to be incorporated, which includes, I would think, virtual training for those who are working remotely for the long haul. Now, we expect issues to arise and be prepared, you know, to address them as and when. So what are some minimum good measures to put in place when employees return to work, Leonard?
Thank you, Hilda. Most employees in Malaysia have actually returned to their offices, to their respective offices, save for some multinationals who may have stricter protocols that they have continued to work from home or otherwise. So what procedures that the employers have to put in place are basically to ensure that there are strict compliance with the SOPs as actually provided under the law. And there has been an increasing trend in using mobile apps in recording attendance of employees for the purposes of compliance with the SOPs and for the ease of contact tracing in the event of outbreak of COVID in a workplace. In Malaysia, while most companies or even retail outlets or F&B outlets, they are encouraged to use the QR code, the app, but they are also allowed to use manual recording, you know, perhaps unlike some other countries, we can hear it from China, because not everyone carries the smartphone in Malaysia. So even officers, we have a dual practice of using the manual recording, manual temperature check, as well as the QR code after we had our temperature checks. Okay, these are some of the measures that are already in place in a workplace in Malaysia. So over to you, Ying, for China.
So for China, an employer is required by law to provide a safe work environment. For most employers who are not in specific industry, this legal provision is too vague to be easily followed. Given the current climate, the compliance with those guidance will be good evidence that I just mentioned for the low risk area, medium risk area, and high risk areas. This kind of guidance would be recommended to be followed that can be deemed as an employer has honored the vague legal requirement of providing a safe work environment. And also interestingly, in China, we have a health QR code. You can see these two examples on the screen. This is very widely applied in China right now. Everyone can use their smartphone download a app or through their WeChat account or Alipay account to download this QR code. If this employee has no infection, has not been traveled to high risk and medium risk area for the recent 2 weeks, then the color showed on this QR code will be green. But if they have recently traveled to the high or medium risk areas, or they have close contact with any infected people, then this QR code will be shown as yellow or red. If this QR code is showed yellow or red, they will not be allowed to enter into certain places. For example, many commercial buildings or government institutions, or like some or train station or airplanes. This kind, if they want to travel by the high-speed train, then they will be difficult to enter into this train station and all this government institution or commercial building. This is for China.
Great, thank you. Now let's move to address the more technical matter of data protection. Are there any personal data concerns an employer should be aware of? Leonard?
Thanks, Hilda. And thanks for sharing, Ying. I think that's interesting because we don't have those type of areas designated as safe and all, the color coding together with the QR code. I think Malaysia should follow suit if we want to keep up to what China is doing. Okay, talking about data, all business premises must comply fully with the operating procedures with regards to collection, processing, and storing of personal data, as set up by the Communication and Multimedia Ministry in Malaysia. Okay, only the customers, visitors, or the employee's name, contact number, date and time of visit should be recorded. And it was up to the premises owners to implement either, as mentioned earlier, either manual or electronic recording, the QR code that we have seen in the previous slide. Okay. A further requirement in Malaysia is that a notice must be displayed, easily seen to inform visitors of customers on the purpose of the personal data, and that the data is used only for the purpose of contact tracing in accordance with the Prevention and Control of Infectious Disease Act 1988. So the data is only for a specific use. Any breaches will be a breach in the personal data protection. Okay, that's all from Malaysia. Over to you, Ying, for China.
Sure, thanks, Leonard. For China, we have a cybersecurity law. Under this law, the employers should obtain the employee's consent for collecting all personal data. So, from legal point of view, if the employee refuses to give such consent and the company notices they have evident symptoms of COVID-19, we would recommend the company should report it to the authority and leave it to the authority to deal with these personal data matters. That will be safer for the employers in China. Back to Hilda.
Thank you, Ying. Now, the next question is a practical one concerning employer and employee rights. Many of my clients have been facing this issue right from the beginning of the lockdown. What should employers do if employees refuse or are unable to return to the workplace? Would you like to take this, Leonard?
Thanks, Hilda. Employers must ascertain the reason for such refusal if the employee refuses to return back to work. For example, whether there is any valid concern on the safety of the workplace. For example, the employee may have been informed or read in news that the entire building, there has been a suspected case or a cluster of people who have been tested positive. Or take, for example, the employee was recently pregnant and she's a bit sensitive as far as the workplace is concerned, and with the advice of the doctors to say that it is better for her to actually work from home, that would be a valid reason. Refusal to work at the workplace without valid reason, as we discussed earlier, may amount to a misconduct. It's basically insubordination. And this warrants disciplinary action if, without justification, the employee refuses to work. So generally, if you look at the situation in Malaysia, most employees in Malaysia would not face hindrances to return back to their offices, save for those who may have traveled out of Malaysia before 18th of March, where we have actually started our movement control order, and they're basically stuck overseas. Or, of course, they could still return, subject to quarantine and, for good reasons. But during those period of time when they couldn't get the approval to return, that will be good reason for not attending work. But apart from that, many months have passed. There's no longer any excuses, I would say, for employees not to turn up to work unless they are with justified reasons as mentioned before this. Okay.
And for China, if the employee is sick or confirmed or suspicious cases of COVID-19 or in close contact with above cases, then the employer may not require the employee to return to work. And in Beijing, if the employee has underage children whose school has not been reopened and the employee's spouse needs to attend to work, the employer also may not require the employee to return to work. But if the employee are not under these above situations, the employer may require the employee to return to work. If they refuse to do so, then they may deem as insubordination, and the employer may impose disciplinary action pursuant to the related internal policies. So that's for China.
Thank you, Ying, and thank you, Leonard. Now let's move to, what it would look like, the workplace of the future. So many people are starting to talk about, remote working. People are all asking about, do I need that office space? Do I need, all the equipments and technology that's required, for physical work? Can I work in, some exotic place, remotely, for a corporate office? All these questions are starting to pop up. PwC launched a global survey, the Future of Work 2020, to understand how companies are adapting to the changing needs of their workforce. And in a rather unprecedented way, I must say, we are seeing that companies are starting to plan remote working arrangement policies. It was found that although more than half the companies are already set up or are in the process of enabling domestic and international remote work arrangements, the rest are obviously still exploring how to make it possible. Only 25% of such companies have considered legal restrictions and regulatory approvals to make such remote working arrangement possible. My area of work is on, cross-border legal immigration as well as tax regulations. Being physically present in one place, working in another location, working for an employer in another location. What kind of cross-border rules, are we talking about? But let's hear from Leonard and Ying from the legal perspective. How do you see COVID-19 changing the workplace of the future? Next question to Leonard.
Thank you, Hilda. Just sharing from the Malaysian experience. It may also apply in other jurisdictions and other countries as well, because we want to put it simply, we are all in the same boat, and we ask ourselves some of these questions. Whether in the future there is a need for physical office. This will be an important question to be asked by the management, or whether there is a need to downsize the office, to resize the office to smaller offices, since many employees now actually work from home. And since, with the more frequent usage of online meetings as well as video conferences, like what we are doing now, Zoom, the Google Meet, Skype, Webex, or WeChat and all, is there really a need, to have such large office space traditionally? And the next question, maybe it also borders on some legal implication, is that whether companies should even consider reduction of workforce, due to digitalization and the use of technology, or more use of the technology. The roles of each employees perhaps needs to be reevaluated and made more efficient to ensure business continuity. I think most businesses, save for some, are actually affected by the pandemic. And I think cost-cutting measures have been applied to most companies. And it is equally important to reevaluate each employee's role to see if there is a need to actually duplicate their jobs, to ensure that you don't need that many headcounts in each organization. Okay, but of course, subject to the rules and the laws before you embark on laying off your employees. The next question we need that we encounter is that after our experience, after the first or second wave, we need to minimize physical interaction with all parties. Okay, in fact, employees are grouped in batches so that they turn up in work in, say, alternate days or alternate weeks. And that actually reduces physical contact with fellow employees and colleagues. And one other issues that we encounter is that contractual dealings, you enter into an arrangement, an agreement, or finally enter into a contract. It can be done remotely, unlike traditionally, where before you sign a contract, you have to go through documents together, you have to shake hands, and then you sign the document witnessed by a lawyer or something to that effect. But now a lot of these contract dealings can be done through video conferencing. And even payments, you of course, even before the pandemic, online payments have already been widely used. And of course, I believe in China, they are ahead of anyone else in the world when it comes to e-wallet and even e-payment. You know, they hardly use cash or checks. You know, in Malaysia, we don't use that much of checks, and we are quite ahead as well in terms of e-wallet and e-payments. We are just behind China, but we are actually ahead of many countries who were supposed to be more advanced than Malaysia in the past. And companies, the next question is that the companies would be devising related policy to mitigate all this risk related to this new normal in a workplace, particularly on safety of workplace. You know, the health and safety issues would be a big issue, particularly for multinationals. When the employee starts to work from home, how can you ensure their health and safety when they work from home? Who is to check their working environment back home? Unlike, you know, when they are under the control of the employers in their respective companies, then you see the law will go after them if there are insufficient steps or protocols to ensure that there's health and safety issues are actually taken care of. But how about those now having to work from home? How do you ensure that? So some of these policies may have to be changed, or even the laws may have to be changed. And the other more practical issue would be perhaps annual leave, the time of work, your working time, or even the claim of OT. When people start to work from home, you need to ask the question, is there still a need for OT? Or how do you monitor that as they claim for OT, there are other times that they are NT, no time, they're not working. How are you supposed to monitor if they really take a lot of time for themselves under the company's payroll, but at the same time they are doing, let's say, online trading or dealing with shares and all those things. So they could multitask, where when they were in the office, there will be more stringent measures, or at least they are being monitored not to do a lot of, you know, they could be moonlighting, doing some other businesses at the same time. So with this new normal, should companies actually consider cutting down on annual leave? Because they already benefited from, you know, working from home. Because in the past, before this pandemic, employees who are actually working from home, some of them, perhaps they are considered as part-timers. They don't get paid the full salary because they chose to work from home. Of course, not all companies, some multinationals, they don't mind employees as long as they're productive enough from home. But other companies would maybe reduce the salaries of those people who actually work from home. So along with that, should companies actually reduce the leave, or disallow overtime claim, or reduce the number of paid leave? Because most employees would have benefited from working from home and having flexible hours and, you know, a work-life balance that they all actually long for before the pandemic. So this is, in fact, is a very ideal situation for example, working moms or working dads for that matter. So there are legal implications, of course, if you were to cut down some of these so-called benefits and to ensure that you still comply with the law. So some companies would need to seek advice to ensure that, you know, they don't go overboard in cutting down benefits, you know, as they see employees working from home. And the next question also is, how about appraisal and evaluation? Traditionally, I think the bosses or the superiors or supervisors are able to monitor the work progress of subordinate right in front of them, under their noses, or they could just pop in to see whether they are really working. Even while they're in the office, there are people who may not be working all the time. Then now when they start to work from home, how are you going to appraise them? How are you going to monitor their progress? How are you going to evaluate them at the end of the year? How are you going to determine the bonuses? If they have certain KPIs, well, that's good. If they have got the billing targets like professionals, that's easy to monitor, easy to appraise or assess. But what if they are doing backroom jobs? They don't have like a strict KPIs. Neither do they have a billing targets or quota to meet. They do not have a sales quota, so to say. It's very hard to monitor when they start to work from home. You know, whether they're really working or they're out shopping or they're fetching their kids from school and so on. So these are some of the issues that, you know, companies would have to, you know, take heed and, you know, do some internal evaluation. And then last but not least, also the usage of personal devices. You know, some of them, when they work from home, they use their own PCs and so on. Are they safe? Are they prone to cyber attacks? Cybersecurity would be a big issue. I think it's going to be bigger during this post COVID-19 working from home environment. And one more issue that I want to talk about, you know, post COVID-19, you know, the lessons we learned is also the increase of the use of electronic signatures. These are some of the issues and questions that businesses would need to ponder. In Malaysia, technically, in Malaysia, contracts do not need to be signed. Even oral contracts are valid contracts. And under the Electronic Commerce Act 2006 in Malaysia, electronic signatures must be able to identify the signer and must be reliable. So Malaysia do have a law to govern electronic signatures, and it must be identifiable to the signer. Perhaps, you know, it must come along with, you know, the email that can be identified to this person, you know, that you actually sign while you're away, in order to satisfy the criteria of the Electronic Commerce Act 2006. But having said that, like I said, electronic signature, of course, you need to go through certain processes to ensure that, you know, this is indeed the signature of the person who put pen into paper. But over and above that, in common law also, the law, in contractual law, in common law jurisdiction, you don't even need to sign to have a valid contract, because all oral contracts, if you have evidence to show that you did enter into a contract orally, it will still be a valid and binding contract. Perhaps the situation could be different in China. Why don't we hear from China, particularly on the electronic signature as well as oral contracts in China?
Thank you, Leonard. Yeah, my observation in China actually is similar. The impact of COVID-19 has made organizations reassess their staffing management and way of working. We have seen many companies has adopt flexible working measures to help employees work remotely, including like a global remote working experiment, like working from home. So this kind of new arrangement may trigger new legal issues in practice. And flexible working arrangement, including not just working from home, also including part-time, shift work, and job share, this kind of new way of work. Flexible working arrangement can be a cost-saving or space optimizing measure, but also many employees actually prefer this kind of a flexible working arrangement. They also encourage or promoting their employers to do that. From their perspective, they will be more flexible. They have more time to stay at home and take care of their family and keep social distancing. Talking about the e-signature, in China, we have an e-signature law, which is issued in 2005. And under this law, e-signature can be recognized in China, but there are certain conditions, preconditions. The employer need to meet such preconditions to generate a valid e-signature. And also, interestingly, in February this year, during the COVID-19 outbreak, the Ministry of Human Resource and Social Security issued a new announcement to encourage the employer to use e-signature. So this is encouraged by the government. But I need to remind that in China, the Chinese court is more likely to uphold an e-signature which has been certified a qualified third-party certification organization. So in current practice, from our experience, this kind of third-party certification organization normally would be domestic companies. If the multinational companies who are using overseas e-signature platform, we need to be careful to ensure that this kind of platform has been approved and qualified by the Chinese government as a third-party certification organization. Back to you, Hilda.
Thank you, Ying, and thank you, Leonard. Now, before we continue, can I just address the participants here? We will be setting aside some time for everyone to pose some questions to Leonard and Ying regarding the areas we've covered, or even related but outside things that they've covered up until now. There will be, if you look at those who are participating through Zoom, there is, if you look at your control panel, you will see an icon called Q&A. Can you start posing questions there if possible, so that the panelists will start preparing for those questions. Those who are logging in through Facebook, I see actually some questions that have already come in. So we will be addressing those questions in a few minutes. Okay. Now, so where do businesses go from here? Unlike many other unforeseen events or events outside management control, a key variable of COVID-19 is that there's no clear guidance as to how long the impact may last, how significant market sentiments are. Regardless, decisions surrounding workplace arrangements are already occurring in boardrooms. The current scenario and lessons learned will no doubt serve as a catalyst for some companies to either develop and stress test the effectiveness of guidelines they have in place. Which brings us to this last question of how organizations future-proof themselves for a post-COVID-19 world. Maybe Ying can share first, as China seems ahead in terms of the recovery stage.
Thank you, Hilda. Yeah, actually, this is a big issue the employers in this globe is facing. We can estimate maybe at least 1 year more for this kind of new normal situation. So what employers can do to face this new situation and protect themselves and keep the business going, this is a big problem in front of everyone. Companies must always be prepared and put in place appropriate arrangement for any potential closure of offices due to COVID-19 outbreak. I think every country has this kind of risk. In China, if there's one infection in the office will be definitely closed, and this whole building may be closed too. So we need to prepare that whether we should back up all these documents. As a law firm, we need to back up our documents and all these emails, informations. And for these all other industries, the employer should have a well-prepared contingency plan and also a business continuing plan. Employees also should be trained to work remotely and effectively. I have heard some of my HR friends found that the employees who are working from home, their activity and also their creativeness would be a bit less than when they are in the office. So how to keep the employees be more active and more creative when they are working remotely? This is a problem. Investing in the online security to prevent potential data breach is also an issue we need to take care of. Confidentiality is a problem when the employees are working from home. They would get used to have a con call, VC call at home, have the kids and the family working around. So definitely there will be some disclosure of the confidential information of the company between the families. So how to deal with it? Conduct training for the employees is I think we have seen the market many companies they are doing right now, but also technical tools can be also used to prevent the employees from disclosing the confidential information. And also, the companies must remain agile and be prepared to embrace changes in business practice. We can see more and more online activities have been engaged in the market. Like now, we have this online webinar. Now, previously, I may need to travel to Malaysia or Landlord may travel to China. We have a face-to-face webinar in front of you, but now we have online webinar now. So we can use some advanced technologies to do more online activities. And more employers and also thinking of investing automation process to minimize the employees and use AI and robots. This is also a new trend in the market. So let us listen to Leno's experience in Malaysia.
I suppose Ying would have covered everything because the issues that have been raised by Ying would be similarly applicable to Malaysia. There are certain things I wish to add. For example, Ying mentioned about once a COVID-19 positive has been detected in the office and then in a wider sense in the building, some buildings will be closed down, it will be shut down, it will be a lockdown. And it happens here in Malaysia as well. So one of the policies that the companies should learn is that to ensure that you rely less on desktop. I think most developed countries are using notebooks anyway, and to give instructions or as part of your SOP that everyone must not leave their notebooks or laptops in their offices, because in the event of a lockdown, what will happen? Because your computer, your data, and whatever, you may have saved certain things in the hard drive of your computer, your notebook, and there's no way you could retrieve it because the entire building is being locked down. So that is something that you need to set in your HR policies as well. And okay, other things that we have encountered that we would encourage companies to look at is also that in the event of a lockdown in a company, you can't go back to the office. There are certain urgent needs. Take for example, for example, a professional service firm or a law firm. Sometimes we need to do, for example, for lawyers, we need to file documents. So we need to prepare documents. We need to make photocopies. It's just not everything online. We need to make physical copies, in order to actually scan it to be filed in court, for example. How do you make photocopies when you're locked down outside? So the companies ought to prepare a list of outlets or suppliers who will be able to assist in doing, for example, photocopying, binding of documents, for some companies where you need to do certain jobs where you still need physical documents and so on. And if in the event of a lockdown, you do not provide alternative, then you'll be asking for trouble. You'll miss your deadline. You will not be able to file certain documents, for example, for lawyers in court on time, and it's, you can't be blaming the COVID-19 all the time for not, complying with the deadlines and so on. So these are some of the things, practical things that the companies actually should consider. And as far as getting your staff to be more productive at home, it is also very important to conduct trainings. Of course, now it will be online trainings to ensure that, perhaps they have things like, like some of our lawyers we do is that we have our timesheets. Perhaps, in other industries, they would encourage employees to actually write down what they have done. Let's say how many hours they spend, or from what time to what time, what have they achieved. in order to meet their KPIs. Because if you don't do that, how else are you able to monitor them? So as part of the training process for people to work from home, perhaps it's also to ensure that they, during office hours, since they're being paid by the company, they should not be taking advantage of that, spending too much time outside. I believe, of course, they will still go out to fetch their kids and what's not, but not to the extent, taking like three hours lunches, or even, go for shopping and so on. And, speaking from experience, recently, a few months ago, we of course, we had our movement control order, the MCO, and the lockdown in some other countries, where they call it, where there's some employees started to work from home, being, of course, paid in full, but they actually went out and checked into a hotel, they went for a swim, and so on and so forth. And the worst part was they actually post that in social media, so the company actually do check, the HR do check their social media account, or through their friends who are in the social media account. And it shows that during working hours, you've got this employee, going either to the mall, or attending birthday parties, or pool parties, or going for their wine and so on, easily taking 3-4 hours off, and still expect to be paid in full. And in law, actually, you could actually institute disciplinary action against such individuals. So of course, the moral of the story is that if you want to go out, please don't post it in your social media, because you can be tracked, and once it's being tracked, actions can be taken against employees who actually abuse their rights to actually work from home. So these are some of the things that both employers and employees should learn. Of course, tightening their cybersecurity system is very important, especially I've mentioned earlier, when your employees start to work from home, some of them may not have a good firewall or antivirus software in your computers, and they're using Wi-Fi, and you know how some of the data can be stolen and can be hacked if you use a Wi-Fi, or some even work in a cafe outside, in Starbucks or in Coffee Bean, whatever. And we've been told by cybersecurity experts to say that when you use such common public Wi-Fi, it's definitely not safe. But do you have such policies that when your employees, when your workers work from home, they should be disallowed to access confidential documents in malls, in cafes, in common public Wi-Fi, because it will put the company in a vulnerable position, knowing that there could be cyber attacks from outside, because they wanted to have their coffee while they work, since conveniently, nobody knows they're actually working from outside. So you need such protocols and policies to ensure that employees are trained not to do that. And of course, as we look at what are the key takeaways from this COVID-19, of course, in some countries, you expect the second, third, or even fourth wave to come along. And, I dare say that, COVID-19, the virus is actually here to stay. So it's either we find the vaccine first, or all of us get immune. So we still have to live around the virus. We have to get used to it, and we have to embrace the new normal. And most importantly, to ensure, if we drill down back to the workplace, to ensure that we still have a very efficient, work protocol to ensure that we are not too affected by this COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, that's my key takeaways, in addition to what Ying has actually shared earlier.
Right. Thank you, Leonard, and thank you, Ying. We've come to the end of the discussion questions, and we'd like to set aside some time for Q&As from the audience. I have some questions here. Please continue to post your questions. Let's try to address some of these questions here, Ying and Leonard. The first one, I believe, is this one maybe for Ying. Talking about the health passport, how is a red zone defined? Is it by state, by district, or by council lines? I believe this is for Ying.
I believe this is talking about the health QR code I mentioned just now. So if this QR code turns out to red, which is this QR code actually is generated by the government. The government will collect many information and create this code. That means if you have traveled to the high risk area, then the mobile phone may have some your mobile phone may have some information on that, then the government can collect this information. Then they will generate it into this QR code, then to show that you have ever traveled to the high risk area, then you will be not allowed to enter into certain buildings and institutions and train stations. So the answer for that is this is generated by the government.
Thank you, Ying. Going to the next question, there is one here on employee work injury scheme. How do we define if an employee working from home having a fall, is this covered by company insurance? Is there a clear definition? Leonard, maybe you'll take this because you covered that during the discussion.
I think at the end of the day, whether the insurance, unless you're talking about the government, employee insurance scheme, if you're talking about general insurance, the insurance that the company actually purchased on your behalf, it all depends on the policy. It depends on what is actually written in the terms and conditions of the policy to see if something happens to an individual or employee working outside of the office, whether it is actually covered by the insurance. I believe most insurance, of course, anyone can actually correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not an insurance expert, but generally those insurance, for example, for personal injury or even the term insurance for workplace injury, whatever that is in place, ought to cover at least injuries that occurred during your working hours, perhaps during your travel to a meeting or something to that effect. But I think the tricky part here is that if you continue to work from home, does your insurance policy actually cover that? I think traditionally it may not, but I believe if I'm not wrong, I've read from somewhere, some insurance policy has actually progressed to actually ensure that the coverage includes those people who are working from home, so that if anything happens to them, the insurance company should not disclaim such liability as to, since it is your insurance were purchased and they should cover accidents that occurred, at your workplace. Since you work from home, we're going to wash our hands clean. It shouldn't be the case because of COVID-19, because most employees are covered under the insurance, and now half of them are actually working from home. So some clauses should cover that eventuality, failing which I think the most important thing you need to do is actually check with your employer, or if you're an employer or if you're an HR, check the policies, go through the policies. If they do not cover, better get it, sort of like added on, like a rider or whatever they call it, to ensure that your insurance also cover those people who actually work from home. At least that is my understanding in Malaysia, but I'm not sure about China. Does insurance still cover when the employees actually work from home and if something happens to that employee?
I think this question is related about whether this is work-related injury. Mm-hmm. And in China, we have work-related injury insurance. And if an accident is confirmed as worker-related injury, then they will be covered by the social insurance. And for a working from home scenario, under the law, it says that if the injury is because of the work-related reasons and take place in the workplace, then they will be generally deemed as a work-related injury. So now, normally, if the working from home is arranged by the employer or agreed by both parties, then the home environment may be also deemed a kind of workplace. And also, if this employee having a fall because of work, for example, they are doing a webinar and he stand up and fall down on the floor, then this kind of situation may be deemed as a work-related reason. So then we can be deemed as work-related injury and covered by work-related insurance, social insurance in China.
But there are, you see, if coming from the insurance company, I think they will be quite vulnerable as well, because if you don't define what is actually working from home, and I suppose that there could be some questions on this as well, someone could be working in Starbucks or working outside, where they are, of course, they are more prone to injury if you actually work in a public area. You have an insurance that covers your notebook, for example. And instead of working from home or working in your office, although you're still working within the working hours, you actually took your notebook and go to the park, or you go to an area which is not deemed to be very safe. And what happens if there is a snatch thief that comes and take away your notebook? Do you think the insurance company will still cover it? If you claim that you are, it's part of your work, but because now we have a WFH, work from home policy, I decided to go to a park which can be deemed dangerous, then I think the insurance company will be very vulnerable, because that increases the risk. So they may want to reevaluate the premiums for the companies to pay on behalf. So I think I go back to my position earlier, is that best actually to check the insurance policy, because every policy will be different anyway. So we are not in a position to say that whether it covers or not. You know what I mean? If you pay less premium, of course it covers less. If you pay more premium, the insurance companies will be more willing to take more risk, in agreeing on the policies.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's similar. If they the key issue is whether this is a work-related reason. Secondly, whether it's workplace. But if they sitting in the mall, it's hardly to say that it's workplace.
But it could be the mall is more conducive if, let's say, their houses are actually too tiny in some countries. I do not know. And they feel that, it will be more conducive since they can't get into the office. They go to the park or the mall. Would the insurance cover? If you ask me, I think it's not very fair for the insurance to cover unless it's provided in a policy that has gone beyond just a workplace or somewhere indoor.
Yeah. So normally I would suggest my client to have a well-designed work from home policy or work from home agreement with the employee. Then we can define what is workplace. We would define a limited space at the home would be workplace. And if they go outside to sitting in the mall, we will say that it's not a workplace under the agreement or under the policy. It's a bit protective for the employer.
Hi, there's a question in the Q&A box. The first one on health code created. Ying, is that a follow-on on the first question that you took on the health certificate?
Yeah, I suspect that is the China position, right?
How is the health code created? How reliable is it? Or
yeah, I just mentioned it actually is created by the government. Tencent and Alibaba work with the government authority to generate this code. And how reliable, as yeah, because it's generated by government, I think it's reliable. And if this individual is traveling around China, and now domestic travel is okay now, so many business people actually is traveling a lot regularly in China right now. But if suddenly, for example, in Dalian recently there are some infection cases, and some areas of Dalian would be defined as high risk areas, then if this individual accidentally traveling in this area at that time, and the health code will be automatically turned into red. Then when he went back to Shanghai, and if they want to go to the commercial building or go to the government institution, then they will be forbidden for their entrance.
Thank you, Ying. There is one question here from, an area in Kedah which was coded as TEPCO. One of our employees apparently were actually highlighted. He falls into this category or is actually from the area. What is the leave policy? Can the employer ask the employee to take annual leave, or what is the suggestion? Actually, I'm quite interested to hear Leonard's answer on this.
When this one is a government's decision, it will be similar to someone under quarantine, or someone who has been in the enhanced, this one is a temporary enhanced MCO. You know, at one time in Kuala Lumpur, there are a few places where they actually imposed the EMCO, where some of the employees are actually locked into that building for like 2 weeks or so. So they can't get out. The government would have to provide them food and water, and they would have to obviously miss their jobs. But what the law requires is that, similar to quarantine, they are basically on additional paid leave. It would not be fair to actually impose and force them to take their annual leave, at least on the first glance. First glance, as in it is something not of their choice, and the company ought to compromise in a way that to see if such individuals could actually work from home. Since half of the companies now allows their the employees to actually work from home and others to work in an office, and if this is something unavoidable, then compromise with an arrangement so that the person could actually work from home, instead of saying that, oh, since you can't come to the office because of this government imposition of the enhanced MCO, so I have to deduct all your leave. That will put the company in a position that subsequently, after the EMCO has ended, the employee has a right to actually go to the labor court, to go to the labor office to actually claim back the leaves, or even for the part where they are not paid. Of course, there are other factors to take into consideration. If, let's say, it's going to be an unpaid leave, or it's going to be a forced leave, or also there are other factors as in what the company is going through. Do they have good justification from doing so, and so on. But like I said, on the face of it, if they are forced by the government not to actually attend work, actually the company has got no choice but to accommodate the employee. Either they get paid for not working, or if you want to get some productivity or some outcome from this particular individual, make sure that the person works from home. I think that would be my advice.
Yep, thank you, Leonard. Let's go to the next question. We have one here, actually still on remote working. How do you define work from home? It says in a company Zoom meeting while sitting in a mall. Is that work from home? I think other than the security issues, clearly there must be tighter policies or different guidelines or a review of current guidelines.
Okay, I think the question that needs to be asked is that unless there is a recent review of their employee handbook or even maybe an addendum to the employment contract, I think most companies do not define what is work from home, because prior to this, not many companies allow employees to work from home anyway. So that it won't be provided in their employment contract. However, since while they may not have the addendum or they, it's not provided in the employee handbook, I think it is reasonable to assume that because of the circumstances, as everyone is actually encouraged to work from home instead of doing nothing, typically working from home means literally working from home. If someone takes the laptop and goes somewhere else, I suppose the company has a right to ask, what is a good reason that you are not really working from home, but instead you're working from Starbucks? Good reason could mean that they do not have Wi-Fi at home and the company is not willing to pay for their Wi-Fi. So they have to, leech on the free Wi-Fis, the public Wi-Fis, or they could be living in some quarters, with other employees or something that it is not conducive. And because of the confidentiality issue, they need to move to somewhere where they are really physical distancing before they work. Those are good reasons. Or for whatever reason, the house or could be too small and they couldn't get space to work conducively, they have to explain to the company. So if the company could accept that they could continue to work anywhere else in the world or any part of the city, it can be work from home. It can be construed as working from home, because you are still working. Actually, you shouldn't use the phrase working from home if you're talking about this situation. It's like working out of sight or working out of office, outside office work. So you can actually work in, it could be at the hotel lobby or something that you find that is more conducive. If the company agrees for that, I don't see any issue. Unless you've got no good reason, okay? You basically wanted to go to the mall, you want to work for 1 hour and you want to, skive off for like 3 hours, doing your shopping or having the sip of your coffee and all those things. And if the company discovers that while you're doing that, you cannot, produce or deliver, your deliverables are affected because you're just loitering around the mall, they could take disciplinary action against you, because there's no reason during working hours to be, loitering around the malls and then just pretend to bring a notebook in Starbucks or something like that, if there's no good reason. But if you have good reasons, as I've mentioned earlier, then you have to explain to the company, and it's up to the company to accept it or they don't. Yeah. How about China, Ying?
So far, China, we have no written regulation about working from home. So it's generally stipulated by the company's internal rules or agreements between both parties. So as I said, I would suggest to have more protective clauses in the internal policies, and also the agreement to define what is work from home, what is workplace, and also for this kind of work-related injury, how to handle it, how to define work-related injury, how to manage the working hours when these employees are working from home. So if we have a more detailed policy or agreement in place, if there is any accident happened in the future, then we have something to reference to. Yeah.
On a related point, I think we've touched on as we were explaining the last question. In terms of the devices that we provide to our employees working from home, are we the employers can track employee activity through monitors, cursors, movements, restricted programs that employees can access? Do we restrict them from all these? Yeah, Ying, would you like to take that?
Sure. If this happens in China, actually this is more related like data protection, personal data collection issue. If you check the employee's activity, their whereabouts, this is part of personal information. So we will need the employee's consent to provide this kind of personal information. Generally, in most multinational companies, they will have this kind of written consent in their employment contract or a separate consent letter. So if they have already provided this consent, generally it's okay for the employers to check the employees' activities. But we need to be careful about the technical tools. So what kind of technical tools you would like to use to monitor or censor the movement, restrict the employees? Generally, if it's a cell phone things, then normally if you want to use the employee's personal cell phone to download the app to check their or monitor their activities, of course you need their consent. But if you use a company cell phone, that would be more disputable. If it's a company cell phone and you have already installed some software or app on that company cell phone, then how to define, how to prove that you have got the employee's consent. So this is also a disputable issue. This is quite a new area right now. We can wait and see how the court and the arbitration tribunal would take view on this kind of new situations. But generally, the general principle under the law, cybersecurity law, is you need to get the employee's consent.
Thank you, Ying. There is one, maybe we have time for one last question, but I think maybe I can address this question. The question says that if majority of companies or businesses now allows working remotely, does that mean that employees can be any nationality working from any country? How does Malaysia regulate this? What about employees who goes back to their home country during MCO and has to work remotely? What happens to their work permit? So the entire MCO, we were actually dealing with issues about people who are stranded. It can be an inbound person, Malaysian, being stranded in Malaysia, but has a job outside Malaysia. It can be a person who is working in Malaysia but unable to go back to their home country during lockdown because of border restrictions. Now, we know, I think immigration issues is one matter. You may have extended your stay, and in the beginning of the lockdown, immigration office was not even opened in Malaysia. So, how do you even get an approval to extend your stay, right? So a lot of concessions were given over that period. Now, if you touch then on the tax laws that surrounds all these, we know that in a number of countries around the territory, we are on territorial rules, meaning to say where you physically exercise work, that will be the place where you will be subject to tax. The source of that income is deemed earned. Okay, so because of lockdown, I may be working in Malaysia remotely for a corporate office in China. Am I then subject to Malaysian tax? Again, the Malaysian tax authorities, the IRB, has given concessions that if you work before you come to Malaysia for a non-Malaysian company, and after the lockdown or border restrictions, you will return to that country, then we will discount all this period. The cross-border rules are very, very complex. Right now, we are still going on case to case to look at individual situations. Right. Is there anything else, Ying or Leonard, that you'd like to address that you think? Anything else that you think you need to share with the crowd here before we close?
following up from that question about the work mobility, while your answer, Hilda, it's more on the tax as well as the impossibility of returning to Malaysia or impossibility returning to their home country, and as a result they have to continue working from the hotel or wherever they are, or they couldn't return back to their working country, and after they return home because of the lockdown and travel restrictions and all the tax issues. But there's another issue as to for example, it could be the new normal, and it's very hard to trace, because when everyone starts to work from home, in fact, in the past, even before the pandemic, there are those people who actually work overseas, but online, they could be working in the Bahamas, but for jobs, in London, or jobs in Malaysia for that matter. And I think that there'll be more of those, because after a while, for example, a professional service firm like PwC or something, you will realize that you could actually get services done, because now you're dealing with some Malaysian employees by instructing them while they work from home. But honestly, you don't even know whether they're really working from home or the malls or the park or whatever, but you give them instructions. So they could be out of the country, it will still be the same thing. So are we opening doors to an opportunity? Of course, generally it's more of the first world people engaging the third world employees, that they could continue to do this, but they may no longer need to hire their own people, because you're actually getting services from cheaper laborers overseas. Because the more expensive labor who are in your country, for example, in Europe or in America, you are dealing with them via the computer anyway. So are they starting to actually engage people from the third world countries to provide the same services at a fraction of the cost? So how does that change? I know there will be some tax implication as to that. And on the other hand, even if you're trying to monitor such things which are happening, which has happened even before the pandemic, it's very hard to monitor because it's everything online, unless there is some a tracker system, from the Inland Revenue, to track such practices. Because in the past, so I would expect more of this to happen. The developed countries will be engaging so-called employees or service providers from, they rather outsource their employees to a cheaper country so that they can save costs. And that would put a lot of expensive countries' employees out of job, because if they could get a better services online from overseas. What have you got to say about that, Hilda?
I think the truth is, Leonard, this is completely the reality now. People are starting to realize that, oh, I can equally work as well, sitting at my desk at home, as compared to really, depending on the industry and all that. And people are starting to make requests, right? And corporations are starting to accede to such requests. They're looking at the possibility of the. I had a client saying that, corporate offices in Singapore. We have a PA who actually lives across the border in Johor. She normally travels on a daily commute basis to Singapore to work in a law firm. But now, she says that she can equally do her work from Johor, and we'd like to accede that. Right now, I think the reality is we are ill prepared for all these laws and legislations, the regulations. We know it's coming in the future. We know that it's going to be a future of work, right? But I think COVID-19 has actually put us in a situation that we need to deal with it now rather than, maybe sometime in the future, right? So it's something that really is now at our doorstep because of a pandemic. And I think it will literally be, cross-border rules need to change, or they need to, have cover situations like these. The OECD model needs to change. Right now, the OECD model is still looking at border restrictions, people who are being stuck, being stranded in certain locations. So we are still dealing with those issues. But I think sooner rather than later, the OECD needs to start looking at, the reality of people working in one location for a corporate office in another location, how then, do we ensure that a person is protected from a double taxation situation, and so on and so forth? And for corporations as well, how do they, ensure that they are not exposed to permanent establishment, filing that they need to do in another country just because, I have a technical person sitting in that country, So yes, that's the reality.
That's a very
Okay,
exciting
I think
areas.
yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I
I
can close
think
my
so. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I can close my session by answering the one question is about what would be the best practice to be prevent errant action taken by the enforced agencies. Yeah, in China, when the situation is worse, the lockdown measures actually is taken, announced by the government, the central government, and the city government, but the institution which implemented the rules would be the local officers, like community officers, and as an employer in our workplace would be the building management company of this commercial building. So I think my takeaway would be keep a close contact with these local officers, including community officers and the building management company. Then they, in some worst cases, they may help you to go through all these difficulties because they are the people who have a close contact with the local government and also have a close contact with you. They can be the bridge between you and the government and help you to solve all these difficult times.
Thank you, Ying. I think we have come actually to the end of our session here. We've all heard some current and some very practical sharing from our panelists today. For me, the key takeaway is that as we return to the workplace, you won't be going back to the same way of working. Or most organizations have not defined or are still grappling and reviewing workplace arrangements on a case-to-case. You as employers need to embrace and evolve behaviors that will make sense for your workplace, in whatever industry that you are in. You may find that you will need to let go of some of the things that you've always done historically, and instead to act quickly and decisively to adopt new strategies and ways of collaborating while maintaining good governance and staying compliant with government rules and regulations. In closing, I would like to thank Leonard and Ying for their time today and very fruitful and rich sharing with us, the MICCI for making this webinar possible. I hope that the sharing has been enriching and that you have benefited from this session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Hilda, Ying, and all the participants today as well from both Zoom as well as Facebook. Yeah.
Thank you, Leonard. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Everybody stay safe. And not forgetting MICCI, Sean is around. Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you, MICCI.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stay
Happy
healthy
working
and safe.
from home.
Okay, thank you. Very good.
All right. Thank you.
Sean here.
Bye-bye. Signing off.